Okay. So welcome today. I think today is a good opportunity to take some time to discuss some of the issues around Hank's forum post about BNS names in L1. There's been a lot of really good discussion in the forum, and sometimes it helps to have a bit more discussion, like vocally in real time. And then maybe we can use that time for this. What does everybody think?
Yep, sounds great.
Okay, I'm going to share a link to that just in case people don't know what I'm talking about. Hey, Mark. Hey. So we're going to talk today about the forum discussion about BNS names in L1. Does anybody want to take go first? I'm sort of like I want to sit in the sidelines on this and hear what people think, because I think there's a lot of good arguments on both sides. Anyone want to go? What do you think about the proposal that Hank put up?
I'm happy to go if no one's waiting to jump in. So I was on TM held a spaces the other day with Ragnar around and some of the .sats people around. I know Ragnar's suggestion is different to Hank's, but some of these issues sort of came up. So I'm not deep in the weeds on Hank's proposal technically. My only sort of, I think it's a super good idea. My only sort of hesitancy was around when you inscribe onto L1, there needs to be some sort of connection between the wallet and the BNS ownership, because if it were just a pattern, so let's say it was something like 3.id/BNS or whatever we decided the inscription would look like to represent our bridged version. If that is then burnt to come back to BNS and make that operational again, and then in the future you want to bridge again, assumedly there's still a sort of first is first principle tied on the L1 side. So if it's a recognizable pattern that isn't tied in some way to each new inscription by a new owner or whatever, do you see what I mean? Like something like a timestamp, but that wouldn't be robust enough because that's still patternable. So you need something that almost can't be replicated by a bad actor.
You're talking about the image that he's the SVG or something that he's suggesting.
Yes, so for example, if that SVG were the same on the second inscription, so if I inscribed it, bridged back to BNS, then I sold the BNS to you, and you then did an inscription. If that inscription was identical to the one I'd done originally, people outside of our relationship could spot that pattern and could do inscriptions that would then clash without ever owning the BNS. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was also a little bit confused about how that worked and why it needed to be an image and stuff like that, but it seems like it should be something that's very clearly. I mean, it seems like there's no way to prevent someone from reinscribing something, right? If there's anything unscribed, you can just copy it and reinscribe it again. So there has to be a first principle. But then, like, also, I mean, it's important to be able to verify. So if you make an image, it has to be something that's very clearly, like, if I compare two of them, I can figure which one it is. And if it's, I actually don't really understand why it needs to be an image. Maybe I missed that.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's more difficult to fake perceptually. Not sure. But yeah, on a fundamental level, I think it's a great idea. The sort of utility that I'm excited about is it lets you then trade on the L1 liquidity. It will let you do things in that ecosystem, in that hype around that, but still maintain your BNS functionality and the option to come back. And yeah, sort of on a fundamental level, I think it's a good proposal.
Yeah, I was a little bit confused about like, so I understand the trading and I understand how that works, but I'm actually kind of sad Ragnar just dropped out because I saw his comment and I also don't really just understand from an application perspective. Like, if your ultimate goal is to make names usable, then doesn't this mechanism prevent those from being used, or like, and if not, like, then like, do you have to write like two sets of libraries? So if the name is on L1, like, login is like this, like resolving is like this, and then if it's on the or L2, like resolving is a different way.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. It's a good question.
Like, I would just be concerned about creating. I mean, it's great to get people trading, but then if you create a system that's basically unusable for anything else, I mean, that sounds not great either. Does anybody else know how that works? Like, maybe Ragnar does. No.
From what was said on the spaces yesterday, and I think it was Ragnar who mentioned it in relation to his app. Once the BNS would have to be locked, would have to be wrapped in a smart contract, and therefore would be unusable while you were, operating in the L1 side. I'm not sure if you can. I think technically you should be able to have a build out that could accommodate that, depending on what the wrapper smart contract was. But I'm not technical enough on this stuff to guarantee that. And I don't think Hank's proposal contains anything to sort of work around that. But perhaps Ragnar, I think he's joined back, could speak more to that.
Hey Ragnar, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we were talking about so today we're just trying to talk about some of the forum discussion, and I was really interested by the point that you made about how when names are locked via Hank's proposal, they become unusable for applications. So my question was, like, just generally for people, does that mean, like, is the intent that names will just not be usable, they'll only be tradable when they're L1? And if that's the case, doesn't it seem like people would want to use them on L1? And then and if they're going to use them on L1, does that mean that we as application developers or wallet developers like Mark, do they have to support like two flows for, like, if the name is an L1, I do authentication like A, and if it's on L2, I do authentication like B? Like, do you know anything about that?
I can speak with firsthand knowledge for Trajan, right? Because it would impact Trajan users, absolutely. Because when you wrap the name, you change the address of the name, and our system will detect that and will then kind of close that profile down. And the reason why we do that is there's a danger that people will build up the pseudonymous reputation, the pseudonymous identity, and sell that and transfer their name to someone else, which sort of defeats the whole purpose, right? And so to do that, that's why we have to close down accounts when the name changes addresses. It's kind of a strict rule. There's maybe some technical workarounds to that, which are a little messy, but as right now, that's how it will affect Trajan. And I mean, not to like talk my own book here, but it seems like, as I understand, Trajan is the only reputation and identity app on Stacks, even Bitcoin in a sense. And so BNS, the whole purpose is to have this decentralized, identity and naming system. I think it would be, it's a little tough to hear, well, that's okay because we want to be able to have a little more uniformity in simply trading names. So I'm very, very skeptical of the trade-off of locking BNS names, removing their utility just to have one more thing to trade on, especially when it's not necessary. So you can have later on BTC names, lots of liquidity without locking up the name. Now, the obvious downside to that is, well, it might be a different owner of a .btc name and a different owner of a .btc BNS name. But to me, I think that's fine. People are smart enough to understand what that is. People are already used to that. So I can go on for that. That's my long answer to your short question, Larry.
Ragnar, can I jump in quickly? I know we spoke on the spaces yesterday. It was quite useful for me. If we took Trajan aside, so I know we've had a discussion around those rules, and you would close the account if technically the BNS moved address, be that being wrapped or sold or whatever. If we just park that for a second, in a more broad sense, the BNS being wrapped doesn't make it unusable if you didn't have that stipulation. Is that right, or am I wrong there?
Yeah, but it is wrapped. And so, we're not going to change it. It's not just us. So this also will affect Siegel. This will affect Console, and it'll affect other future applications. So I put it to Siegel a day or two ago, and basically they did say that, like, if a name is wrapped, basically it doesn't really work. So it's not just us. It's like other apps as well. And future apps.
But that's because that's the way the libraries work right now. And I understand your concern about transferring it, and that's like definitely noted. I like like instead of thinking about specific apps, just think of it like from a really high level. Is the intent to pitch this as users as okay, like you're putting your name in like trading mode on L1, and it's like in trading mode you can't like point at stuff, you can't like do other, you can't like log in with it, and then once it's out of trading mode, you've traded it. Like now if someone wants to use it, they have to transfer it back to Stacks to use it. Is that the theory, or is the plan like it's going to stay on L1 and people can point it at stuff and people can log in with it? Because if it's the second one, then there's going to need to be like there's like literally two systems. There's an L1 system and an L2 system, and L2 has smart contracts, L1 does not. So like they're totally going to be different, right? And so like it's more like how it's positioned. Is the link positioned as like you can trade it on L1, but to use it you need to move back to L2, or is it something else? And maybe Hank's probably the one to answer that.
Yeah,
the other
that's
side,
probably
we'll try to come up with technical solutions if we want to have it both ways or don't want to have it both ways.
Yeah, I think that's a Hank question. That he couldn't join us, maybe he will. But yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point, which is trading. So there's utility and there's trading. So to me, getting rid of the utility on L2 when you don't need to trade these L1 names. So these L1.btc names, as far as I understand it, will just be trading. There's not real utility that you can do there other than accepting Bitcoin payments to that name, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing, which to me is a really bad idea because that really hurts your privacy by having a static address where all your Bitcoin goes to. But hey, if people want to make that bad decision, they can, right? So yeah, and Larry, if there was some cool way to be able to have it both ways, where one person controls both names on both chains, but on Stacks, that name is still usable. I could see, that could be a good thing. I'm not smart enough to know how to do that, but maybe there is. And one other point I'll bring in, and then I'll let someone else jump in here, is that what's ultimately probably going to decide BTC names on Ordinals is going to be the big marketplaces. So the ones with the most volume are Unisat, Magic Eden, Ordinals Wallet. Basically, it varies, it goes up and down. Basically, those are the ones. And Unisat, Magic Eden, and Ordinals Wallet already have that BTC name. So this is all sort of just an academic exercise, unless at least those three marketplaces are consulted and say, hey teams, like this is what we're thinking over here for our version of .btc names. Will you guys support it? And if you say, no, it's too confusing. We already have .btc names. Well, then what do we do then? That's my question.
Yeah, confusion is also a big issue. This week somebody came up to me and said, hey, I'm trying to renew .id. I'm trying to use your app to do it. It's not working. What's wrong? And I found out that the reason it wasn't working was because they had actually wrapped it in a smart contract to trade it on Gamma or something like that. So it actually wasn't owned by, they weren't the owner anymore. And so like whenever you add this complexity, stuff just breaks and like it becomes hard to reason about. So I'm definitely sensitive to that. Just to jump back, I don't want to sort of attack you here, but I mean, Ragnar, the problem with I understand your concern about transferring names, and it's definitely totally legitimate. But the problem is like you can always transfer names. Like, and there's no way to prevent it. Like if my Stacks address is a ledger, right? I can just give the ledger to Mark or give it to Tommy, right? And it's transferred. There's nothing you can really do about that because I can always transfer the private key. So I don't really see how, I mean, I understand the problem, but I think you're trying to solve like an unsolvable problem, unless I'm totally missing something.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Larry. So I think transferring a private key is an edge case, because if you transfer your private key, you still have the private key. Now two people have their private key. So
no, it could be like a hardware. It's in the hardware device. I've never written it down. We were both there. When we made it. I mean, it's like not. I mean, hardware security modules are a thing, right?
Yeah. I think that's such an edge case. I think what people do is they just transfer names to a new address, they buy it from someone or transfer for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, people do that now. But if you're successful or when you're successful, and there's a lot of value around that identity, dude, if the identity is worth like $10 million, like $100 million, like I'm gonna figure out how to transfer that name. Like maybe I just sell the company. Maybe the name is owned by a company. It's an organization, right? I just sell the company. All the employees come with it, right? Like there's ultimately like if there's value around it, people can transfer it. Like it's
Yeah, I think that's, hey, you know, that's the thing when you're building apps. You got to think of all the weird edge cases. What's the financial incentives? How much money does it take to take that risk? I personally would never buy a private key simply because that person could tell you they don't have a copy. They didn't write down the seed words or whatever. I would never believe them, especially when money's on the line. Is it possible? Absolutely. And so, but to your larger point, Larry, yeah, like, yeah, for trading, like we are looking at, you know, kind of fallback. What happens if people do it? Is there a way that we could flag it or come up with some other solution? It's just a thorny, you know, as you know, like it's just one more thing to build,
Yeah.
one more template. But I don't want to get too off track.
It's a hard problem. I just wanted for the sake of discussion about the name system. I think it's like looking at the actual address owner and saying that like that's like the person hasn't changed is like that's a weird proxy, and I don't think we should build this system like under that assumption, because the assumption is really not, it's impossible to enforce.
I also
I do,
think
but I do think that the problem that you have, like where like if you transfer the name to layer one, nothing else works. Like that's a really important question to address.
If you transfer the BNS name to layer one.
Yeah, I mean, you can't log in, you can't point it to stuff, etc. Right? You need to essentially design an entire separate set of logic for updating, pointing names at stuff, logging in with them, etc.
Yeah, not sure I totally follow, but I could ask you afterwards.
I'm just saying that like if you have if you sign in, if you want to update a layer 2 name, you call like a certain method in the stacked smart contract. If you want to update a layer 1 name, like there's a totally different way to do that. It requires inscribing something else, perhaps, right? So there's like there's two paths. So like from a wallet's perspective, there's two paths. It's like using Lightning and using on-chain. Like, do you see what I'm saying? There's two different code paths. And so my question is the intention, like, I mean, for everybody, do we want to position this as like when names are on L1, they're just for trading? Or do we want to implement two separate like name management systems?
No, I see your point. Yeah, you know, it might come down to what I think 99% of people are thinking this is just a way to trade, you know, and that's why I think there should be such a strong wrapping connection, because they should just be untethered to prevent complication. Now, people could say, hey, look at these .btc names. I'm going to build some app with it, with you log in your ordinal name. Like, it's possible people will build. That's the other thing. So I don't know. Maybe the larger picture is we even have stacks names .btc on layer 1, just in general, regardless of the approach. I don't know. Maybe.
Cool. Don, Gina, any thoughts?
I think I have just similar questions in terms of, I think I had actually asked that on the forum in terms of what would be the user experience for folks who then, who ultimately sort of mint their name on the L1. So yeah, similar questions. I don't have any additional answers, but I do think that it's a pretty fascinating thing that also, I think if we're talking about like the Bitcoin name system, being able to port it to the L1 and then potentially having more functionality follow could be a pretty compelling just evolution of the protocol. So I'm curious to learn more details from Hank. I wonder if we could do, I wonder if it's possible to almost like have a general question about it over like Twitter Spaces or something that's maybe a little bit more open to the community. There's also,
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know, maybe hearing from the BNS DAO folks, getting more people involved in the conversation would be good. But yeah, I feel like it's still early. I still have the similar questions. Excited to learn more.
I suggested a follow-up to the TM Spaces, Gina. I know Ragnar was on the one yesterday and Hank wasn't, so I suggested run the same thing again with Hank there, which they seemed up for. So keep an eye on their Twitter. It looks like they're going to be running something.
Please make it earlier. 1 a.m. is so late.
Yeah, we could have done it earlier. That was a good Twitter space, I thought, kind of productive. But I think Magic Eden, Ordinal's Wallet, and Unisat should be contacted, because if they say we're not going to do your version of things, I mean that seems really, really tough, really tough. And now you have, you know, if Gamma supports it, great. But Gamma, if you look on the graphs, like they're kind of not even there. No offense to Gamma, but they're not. And so I think Unistat, Magic Eden, and Ordinal's Wallet should be contacted and just say, this is what we're thinking. You know, maybe there's a way for them to denote .btc, like this is BTC, you know, S or BTC plus or whatever. Maybe that's the way to know the differences. You know, just like there's Bitcoin, there's Bitcoin Cash, like there's Bitcoin SV. Not to give anyone like burn, but that is a way that people know the difference just by the name. But I think those three companies should be contacted very early. Otherwise, we're going to spin our wheels and be like, well, can't trade these because no marketplaces with any volume support them.
Makes sense.
I only know the guy at Ordinal's Wallet. I know him. He was at the conference, but I don't have great contact with Unisat or Magic. Maybe other people do.
Cool. Okay, well, it sounds like a good next step is to have a more community focused Twitter space and talk more about technical. I mean, it's not really technical details. I think I would frame it more as like product positioning, like how do we want the integration to look? Is it names are active when they're on stacks and then they go into trading mode, or is it they can be used in both? I mean, I personally think they should be usable in both. But that's why I was asking the question. I wanted to get a sense of what other people thought.
I think we sort of need. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Ragnar. Just quickly, I think we sort of need two. I think we need a community-led, what do people want to see discussion, and we need a technical discussion. Because if, for example, Hank's proposal involves pairing the two and both remain active, that might be 10 times more work than a lighter proposal. So we need to find out what people want and then understand what's technically possible within a reasonable amount of time. Would seem sensible to me, and that technical discussion might not be the same one as a sort of community. There'll be a subset that are interested in the technical.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think it's important. I mean, define what people want, but then also figure out what the product positioning and like what it would look like. Because I feel like great proposal from Hank, but I was a little bit confused at what's being built. Like it's sort of like this is how we build it. But then I'm not really sure, like, and I understand they're being linked, but I'm not like, it's not clear, like, okay, once this is done, what do we have?
Yeah, and Larry, you brought up a really good point in the last meeting, talking about, because I brought up .sats, and you brought up the point, well, maybe we should kind of think about that as well when we take the ordinals .sats on BNS, and should that be part of the discussion about .btc? Should it be like a cohesive way to position this as a product? Maybe not, but I think we should talk about that. What's interesting about .sats is there's more ordinal .sats named than there are stacks BNS names, right? So that's
yeah,
kind of
not surprising.
And if we can, so for people who don't know, I own the .sats BNS namespace. So it'd be interesting. I'm working on how to do that with different people, like different approaches, but the point is that if we can have a nice way to onboard all those .stats holders and give them their equivalent name on BNS, we just double the number of BNS users. Now, I know there's overlap, like a lot of those people are already stacks people, right? The .stats, there's a lot of overlap, but still, I think the numbers are very, very compelling. So my preference is that we have one cohesive way where we say, hello, market, Bitcoin people, we're stacks people. We have this idea to do from L1 to L2, from L2 to L1. This is how we're thinking about it. So it's cohesive, because I wouldn't want the .sat standard conflict with the .btt name. I mean, talk about confusion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it seems entirely 100% obvious to me that like it needs to go. I mean, like if we just take .sats and bridge it to L2, like it should just be standard both ways. Like there's no reason to, like, we shouldn't make different standards. Like that's just like obvious onboarding thing.
Yeah, and that's
Definitely
why
can't argue with the user argument. The user, yeah, getting users is sort of key. In my head, the L1 stuff, I don't dabble in the L1 sort of namespaces personally, but accessing that user base to bring it over and interact with it is definitely key, I think.
Yeah, because the way I want to handle the .sats name BNS, I would prefer that it be consistent with BTC on ordinal. If we should do that even at all, maybe we should even do that. I don't know, but I prefer that. But
I'm going to circle back around to Magic Eden. I do have a contact at Magic Eden, but it is contingent on another possible deal. So just keeping that in mind, we might have an opening there at some point.
Cool. We're getting up to the end of the half hour for this. So I propose that we continue this on the forum thread. And then who can take responsibility for scheduling another Twitter space, perhaps a little bit earlier in the day? Who did that last time? Anybody know? Trust Machine, right?
Yeah,
No,
Yeah, I can follow up with our team.
Yeah, we can follow
Okay.
up on Brandon and the team there.
Yeah, maybe like around this time. Like that would be good for me.
there's Don. There's Don. I didn't make the connection, Don, that who you were.
Yeah, hi Ragnar. We're going to be chatting tomorrow.
Yeah, we're talking about. This whole time I didn't know it's the same. Okay, sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. And you know, my thoughts are the same as yours, Larry. I'll just put a note there. I have to go, but you know, it's what's the intentions for the utility on L1 from Hank, and that's a big question mark. And once we have that answered and kind of get some community consensus on that, you can kind of move forward with next steps and kind of figure this out. But until we have that one, that seems like the next the question to answer.
Cool. Well, let's continue discussion online, and then also on the next spaces.
Great. Bye.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, everybody.